This is my confession to you. Whenever I preach, you will get what I need to hear. And hopefully, y'all will get something out of this too. Quite honestly, when I was asked, a couple months ago to preach today, the first thing I did was check out what scripture passages were lined up on the Revised Common Lectionary. I love to preach, but this time of year, the end of the church year and into Advent, the lectionary gets pretty apocryphal. And let's face it, if you want to read something apocryphal these days, all you have to do is open up the newspaper. But lately I've been wrestling with my reactions to this oh-so-wonderful news of the day that I stopped watching CNN the day after the election last year. It's funny because the other day I read a Facebook post of mine from 5 years ago in which I talk about how much I enjoyed starting my day with CNN and that the hosts seemed like friends. Watching the television newscasts last year just became too much. They focused too long on one thing, and I had no control over what the content would be. So now I get my news only from the New York Times and the local newspaper, the Press Democrat. And besides, CNN doesn't have the comic strips like Pearls Before Swine. When I was new to AA, I had a very troubled relationship with my mother. In fact, I hadn't spoken to her for the better part of 10 years. My sponsor at the time suggested that I pray for her to have the same good things in her life that I wanted for myself. It took about 2 years, but it worked. I was able to mend fences with my mother, and this method has worked with other relationships as well. It's said that prayer changes the one who prays. It was true with my mother. I knew I could never change her, but on the other hand, it definitely opened my heart. The advantage of this method is that I am not asking for a specific outcome. After all, God is not the cosmic vending machine. It took away any ulterior motives I might have had. In our current political climate, there are many, many things that I would like to change. There's more than just one politician whose heart, mind, and modus operandi I would like to see softened. So, I pray every day that they might know true peace, love, and joy in their lives. Mind you, God and I usually have a few more words after that. Oh yes, we do. I try desperately to stay away from the words "so that," to make sure that I'm not praying to benefit myself. And I do hope that having these truly good intangibles in their lives might make a difference in their policies. While I was glad to have mended my relationship with my mother, I in no way, shape, or form ever wish to be reconciled with the cruel policies I'm seeing right now. Okay. With that having been said, let's talk about Jonah. One of the things I love best about Scripture is that even though the stories are thousands of years old, and technology has changed, and the world has changed, people are exactly the same. It's very easy to see aspects of ourselves in the biblical characters, although I hope not to see too much of Jonah reflected in myself. Most of us remember the story of Jonah because he gets swallowed up by that big fish. That was in chapter 1, where God told him to go preach to Nineveh, and he hopped on the first ship that was leaving in the opposite direction. So God sent a storm, and at Jonah's behest, the sailors threw him overboard in order to calm the storm. God sent the fish to save Jonah from drowning, and after letting Jonah think about what he'd done for 3 days inside what I'm guessing was a fairly stinky fish, God made the fish spit Jonah out so that he could fulfill God's mission. And Jonah spends all of chapter 2 singing God's praises. Well, after his ship and fish experience, we come to this morning at the start of chapter 3, in which Jonah goes to Nineveh and delivers God's message. In Hebrew, it's only 5 words. So Jonah walks into town, says the 5 words, and those words have a dramatic effect. And what does Jonah do after this great success? Naturally, he pouts. Come to think of it, we're never told exactly how old Jonah is, but he sort of sounds like a 3-year-old or maybe a teenage girl saying that he's upset enough to die, not once, but 3 times. Well, I can begrudgingly partly forgive Jonah for his overly dramatic response. Nineveh, after all, was the center of the Babylonian Empire, which in later years would overrun his own country. There was probably already enmity between the 2 countries, and he wouldn't have been thrilled to do something to save them. In fact, verse 5 of chapter 4, we see Jonah sitting a safe distance from the city, hoping to see its destruction, possibly another Sodom and Gomorrah. Mostly, though, I just want to ask him what his problem is. And I guess Jonah's biggest problem is that he's only human. So I picture him sitting back in his chaise lounge lawn chair with one of those drinks served in a coconut shell with those little paper umbrellas, waiting for, in his estimation, Nineveh's well-deserved comeuppance, preferably by fire and brimstone. I have to admit that I've taken great satisfaction in pulling up beside the idiot who cuts me off in traffic at the next stoplight. The Germans have a great word for our human proclivity to take satisfaction in the misfortunes of others. Oh, and she's here. Pardon my German. Schadenfreude. 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 Jonah's problem with God is that, as we heard Evelyn read, God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from punishment. Jonah doesn't like God's reaction because God is nice. God has mercy when what Jonah really wants is strict justice. Remember that before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham was negotiating with God that if there were 50 righteous people, God would not destroy the cities? Abraham was pleading for God to have mercy. How do you think that conversation would go with Jonah? Surely you're not going to let them get away with that. I picture God rubbing God's temples as a headache comes on. Jonah wants justice with no mercy. I've been thinking a lot for the past couple weeks about the relationship of justice to mercy. I think I have more questions than answers. What is justice without mercy? Can you have true justice without mercy? We talk about social justice so much, and what do we really mean by that phrase? So many of the times we invoke social justice, do we not mean mercy? One of my biggest current social justice issues is around immigration. I live in a skilled nursing facility where most of the workers do not look or sound like me. Trust me, they're doing a thankless job that not many other people are willing to do. It's not pretty. It's not the sort of job you can tell stories about at a cocktail party. They do for me what I can no longer do for myself, and make my life not only livable, but possible. The other day, I asked one of my wonderful caregivers if they carried their passport with them everywhere. He said yes, and also that he doesn't go anywhere he doesn't absolutely have to go. He lives in fear. What justice is in this situation? And what is mercy? You know, the idea of hell did not originate in the Hebrew Bible. Although once exposed to the idea during the Babylonian captivity, it proved quite popular. Hell neatly solves the problem of why don't people who do bad things get punished immediately. Just like Lot's wife. She disobeyed and turned, and bam, pillar of salt. Why does God let them get away with this? Where is the punishment? This is not fair. We want to see punishment. The concept of hell lets us put off the idea of punishment and or retribution until the afterlife. Even though somebody might look like they're getting away with something now, as 70s sitcom star Maude used to say, God is going to get you for that. So let me think, on which day did God create hell? First day, let there be light, then firmament, sun, moon and stars, dry land and seas, vegetation, animals, humans. Gosh, no hell. The concept of hell has always bothered me, and a few years ago, I decided to study the issue. I read several books and thought and prayed, and I came to the conclusion, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, I came to the conclusion that a loving God would not create a place of eternal torment with no opportunity for parole. While I'm not the true judge, that would be God's job, I see neither justice for perpetrators nor mercy for victims in the idea of hell. In the event that I am bad wrong, I agree with those folks who say that if God did indeed create hell, God is too merciful to send anyone there. In fact, the only hell I can see is the hell that we humans make on earth with our eternal abuse of power. Remember a few years back when that white kid shot and killed a group of black people at Bible study? Rather quickly, it seemed to me, the victims' families announced that they had forgiven him. I would not have had the time to process the trauma on that day, much less move to a place of forgiveness. Was it real forgiveness on their part, or was it cheap mercy? I personally am against the death penalty. If you find out later you got it wrong, there's no do-over. Again, there are families of victims who seem only to be able to find closure by watching the perpetrator be executed. So many people are traumatized in this situation, including the prison personnel and anyone else required to attend. Is this justice? When I was in preaching class in seminary, they told us to preach the Bible in one hand, newspaper in the other. And just the other day, the New York Times was an extraordinary help to me. It carried a long article about a California prison that is essentially a medical detention center. It was started in the late 80s in response to the AIDS crisis. They have a hospice unit that ministers to dying inmates, and in addition to employing a chaplain and a social worker, they have a large garden, and they have trained numerous inmates in pastoral care. Both staff and inmates can spend restorative time in the garden, and the trained inmates minister to the dying, offering a ministry of presence so that no one has to die alone. While the inmates are compensated for their work, a whopping 24 cents an hour, as opposed to the $1 an hour they could learn doing anything else, they all say they would work for free. One man said that doing this ministry has given him back his humanity. So much mercy in a place meant strictly for justice. Mercy and justice, they're inextricably tied together, almost like they're two sides of the same coin. And we humans need to try to get them to balance, except 50-50 rarely works. The ratio keeps changing. So it's more like two people balancing each other out on a teeter-totter. And it's our job as people of faith to continually wrestle with this changing dynamic. With God's help, may we be up to the job of figuring out how mercy and justice fit together. Alleluia.